Hello, my name is Daithí O'Fallamháin. I'm the Secretary with the Irish Freedom Party, and today I want to explain the Irish Freedom Party's policy regarding international protection. That is, what would we do about asylum seekers? Our reasoning is quite straightforward. As a nationalist party, we believe Ireland should be in complete control over our border. The Irish Freedom Party declares that Ireland is under no moral obligation to subject herself to unlimited immigration. So our policy reflects this belief. In short, the IFP would reserve the right to remove Ireland from any organization or any treaty which imposes any obligations on us regarding our border. It's that simple. The most prominent of these, of course, would be the EU. We are the Irexit Party, after all. But also the European Convention on Human Rights, as well as the European Court of Human Rights, and finally the Geneva Convention on Human Rights. But there are others. I will now explain why it is in relation to irregular immigration that we need to abandon these organizations and treaties. Our government is constantly referring to Ireland's international obligations. It's a source of much frustration because their spokespeople rarely specify what the sources of these obligations are. And any normal person observing what is happening to our country finds it so nonsensical. But international law and common sense don't always go together. As difficult as it is to accept, the government is right. We do, in fact, have international obligations, because we have signed up to these agreements. But international law leaves countries exposed with no way to legally defend themselves. The basis of these international obligations originated in post-war Europe. The world was a different place then. The world's economy has since become more highly globalized, travel has become much easier and cheaper, human trafficking is at this stage more of an art form than it is even as a business, and people's attachments to countries has been deliberately crushed. Grievances towards former colonial state powers, while justified, have led people born in these countries to believe they have a right to live in Europe. Now, while the IFP's preference is to be honourable, saying outright that these obligations are dangerous and so must be relegated to the past, we realize we cannot legally extricate ourselves from these obstacles overnight. In the meantime, as the international community refuses to reform the law, Ireland will just ignore it. You might ask, if this is the law, how will you be able to ignore it? Well, one, we wouldn't be alone. Countries treat international law like a dessert cart, picking and choosing as it suits them. Even France, in complete violation of a European Court of Human Rights ruling, recently sent an asylum applicant back to Uzbekistan. 2. The Geneva Convention and the European Court of Human Rights have no sentencing powers. Ultimately, they are guidelines. The European Court of Human Rights hands down decisions which individual governments are expected to turn into national law, which sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. Geneva has even less enforcement possibilities. The only court associated with it are the International Court of Justice, and that only plays a role in settling disputes between states. Geneva is, in essence, an agreement based on voluntary compliance. All the same, it is considered legally binding. And since it is legally binding, our government can use this as an excuse for their inability to stop mass irregular immigration, no matter how many come or under what circumstances. And even if you stopped every asylum seeker/refugee making their way to Ireland through EU arrangements, the Geneva Convention still stands. So, focusing on the Geneva Convention, I will elaborate on some of the legal provisions that stop Ireland from dealing sensibly with asylum seekers. But first, let's get something clear. You will not see the term asylum seeker in the Geneva Convention. You will see the term refugee. Asylum seeker is merely a commonplace term for a refugee who is yet to have their application adjudicated. The law essentially leans in favor of asylum-seeking refugees, innocent until proven guilty, treating them as if they were merely waiting to have their refugee status conferred upon them. You may have heard the expression, "no person is illegal." The statement is backed by Article 31 of the Geneva Convention. Regarding refugees, it states, and I quote, "The contracting states shall not impose penalties on account of their illegal entry or presence." Continuing, "Provided they present themselves without delay to the authorities and show good cause for their illegal entry or presence." Unquote. So that's it. There is no such thing as an illegal immigrant, provided they apply for international protection, that is, asylum. This leads us to the question of passports. Much has been made about asylum seekers turning up at the border without passports. Surely that's illegal and disqualifying. But again, the Geneva Convention states, quote, "The contracting states shall issue identity papers to any refugee in their territory who does not possess a valid travel document." Unquote. It is accepted that some won't have papers. But consider the reason for this. If one group of people living near a border are suddenly set upon by, say, a government-funded militia, these people will flee over the border. These people may have never had passports, but they still need international protection. The argument is that it would be wrong just to push them back over the border to certain death for lack of a passport. So the logic holds for the asylum seeker arriving in Dublin. If you genuinely feared for your life should you be returned to your home country, then disposing of your passport on the way to the IPO makes sense. On the other hand, if a person comes to Ireland without a passport, even if they are later identified, the country of origin may not want them back. If Ireland doesn't have a deportation agreement with that country, nothing can be done. Yes, flight records can be checked, but without a passport, you still have to prove the asylum seeker is the person you think he is. And by then, they've already started into the system. You could conceivably fingerprint everyone before boarding, or just have prints on your passport hooked up to an international database, but who wants that? So, why can't we just deport people when they show up at our border? If we remain bound by the Geneva Convention, any talk of deportations, especially mass deportations, is nonsense. Article 32 states, and I quote, "The contracting states shall not expel a refugee lawfully in their territory, save on grounds of national security or public order." Unquote. In other words, as soon as an asylum seeker has uttered the words, "I seek asylum," they are, for all practical purposes, legally in the state. Article 32 continues, quote, "The expulsion of such a refugee shall be only in pursuance of a decision reached in accordance with the due process of law. Each case must be examined individually. You can't just expel a group of people from a particular country because you think they're a bunch of chancers. You might think, well, Ireland should only take refugees who would integrate easily. But Article 3 of the Geneva Convention says, quote, "The contracting states shall apply the provisions of this convention to refugees without discrimination as to race, religion, or country of origin." Unquote. You can't be fussy when doling out international protection. Finally, why do we accept asylum claims made by people originating in safe countries? The simple answer is that a person from an otherwise safe country might have a valid claim for international protection because of belonging to some minority, ethnicity, or political affiliation or sexuality. That is, the country is safe, just not safe for this person. And again, you have to deal with each case individually. Nationalists are sometimes condemned as looking backward. But this isn't true. We are looking at demographic trends. We are looking at the future as it is being created by those currently in power. For example, Africa's population grows by 30 million people a year. That is, at a rate of 6 times the population of Ireland. Every year. Throw in mass unemployment and the concept of climate refugees, and you don't need to be a visionary to see the future. Irregular migrants have already come to the EU by the millions. The Mediterranean is a bridge, not a roadblock. When we have complete control of immigration, we will create laws that suit Ireland and common sense. What we need to do is to disincentivize would-be asylum seekers from choosing Ireland as a destination of preference. I believe that once it is known that Ireland is not participating in the international asylum scam, That will be enough to keep most away. I admit the phrase "close the borders" has a certain emotional power, but it's not practical. We want Ireland to have a thriving tourist industry. We do international trade. So while we may not be able to stop every would-be asylum seeker from arriving in Ireland, we can make it a very unattractive option. We can make it so those foolish enough to come soon want to leave. The Irish Freedom Party will establish locations where all asylum seekers will stay until their cases are judged. This, of course, violates the convention, but Japan puts asylum seekers in detention centers. In Japan, asylum seekers are denied work permits. Asylum seekers are denied social services. No one in the international community is calling for boycotting Japan. Similarly, in Ireland, there will be no turnkey-ready apartments for such people. There will be no hotels or B&Bs. No asylum seeker will live in better circumstances than an Irish person in temporary accommodation. There will be no tree planting days or ceilidh dancing lessons. No work programs or free university. And of course, anyone arriving without a passport will remain a guest of the nation until their identity can be established and their case judged. Unvetted people will not be allowed to roam our streets. Again, and I happily repeat myself, the Irish Freedom Party is nationalist. We put the needs of Irish people before anyone else. The purpose of all of this is to give Ireland full control over who comes to stay in our country. It doesn't mean we never take any refugees if we really feel the situation merits it, but acceptance will be seemingly random, and must include the condition that their presence, socially or financially, does not hurt Ireland. It will be our decision, not anyone else's. Thank you for watching.